This video is going to be a doozy. I'm going to present to you some ideas that will hopefully rock your world, blow your mind. They are not fully refined. I'm still working these ideas out in my own head, and so I apologize for that fact. But there are three very big ideas that, if you understand, can help you elevate your life very quickly. They can also help you realize potentially why you're not moving your life forward as much as you want. The first one is an idea in psychology called inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness is the idea that there are infinite things going on all around you, opportunities, situations, people that you're completely unaware of because you're so focused on or distracted by whatever it is you're focused on. As one easy example, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is something that more and more people are becoming aware of, but maybe in the past they were blind to. And maybe, there's this whole mania around Bitcoin right now, and people are kicking themselves because why weren't they aware of it? Or why didn't they think more deeply about it when they'd heard of it the first time? Maybe back in 2010 when it was $1. If they had invested in it back then, they would now be a millionaire, a billionaire. So we're all blind to a lot that's around us. Actually, William James, the Harvard psychologist, he's the father of American psychology. He said that there are millions of things going on all around us that we're blind to. And the reason we're blind to them is because we're focused on what matters to us. Our experience is whatever we pay attention to. Your experience is whatever you pay attention to. William James then said, there's one difference between the genius and the ordinary person. It's not the fact that the genius has a better ability to focus. It's actually what the genius places his attention on that other people are blind to. Albert Einstein was able to put his attention on to see and to notice the laws of relativity, whereas other people are still blind to the dimensions of relativity. So the first one is blindness. And my question to you is this: what was your former self blind to that you're now not blind to? That's a really great question. What are you currently aware of, and what are you currently pursuing and seeking that your former self, could be a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, had no clue of? What are you now aware of, seeking, and pursuing, or striving for and creating in your life that your former self had no perspective of? Your former self hopefully is more blind than you are right now, but the same is true of your future self. Your future self knows more than you know. And so an obvious question is to ask yourself, what is your future self focused on, aware of? What do they value? What are they worried about? There's a great quote. It's a Chinese proverb, and it says, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And so if you want to think about what does your future self want, what should you be focusing on now? In order to actually live intentionally, you have to start thinking about where you want to go. And this brings up the second concept. And it's actually, in a lot of ways, the exact opposite concept of inattentional blindness. It's actually called strategic ignorance. So strategic ignorance is where you're strategically making yourself blind to things you don't want to be aware of. It's about creating a filter and boundaries of your attention so that you don't let certain things in. So one question is, what are a lot of things that you're currently aware of, or currently focused on, or currently distracted by that you should be blind to? In other words, what should you be strategically ignorant of? There's so many things going on out in the world today that are irrelevant to your goals or to your situation or to your values, but chances are you may be distracted. And so what are all of the things in your life, in your world, that you should become more blind to? In other words, what can you become more ignorant of on purpose? This is one of the good reasons why you would want to remove news and media. As an example, Peter Diamandis, who is a futurist, he is blind on purpose to mainstream media because it's not helpful to his goals. He sees the biases. He doesn't see value in it. Seth Godin, the famous author, he's chosen to be strategically ignorant of how people review his books on Amazon. He used to read the reviews of what people would say about his books, and he realized it was not helpful to him. And so he's chosen to be strategically ignorant. He's chosen to create rules or boundaries or a filter for his mind so that he no longer needs to see anything that's going on there because he knows it's ultimately distracting him from his purpose. Question number one is, what are you currently blind to that your future self would like you to start becoming more aware of and start thinking about so that you can start mentally preparing for those opportunities or those situations? Because right now there's things coming in and out of your orbit that you're probably not aware of because you're so focused on whatever you're focused on or distracted by whatever you're distracted by. There's once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that present themselves to you all the time. You could call them little tests that pop up and appear, and you may fail those tests because you're either underprepared. You may fail those tests because you don't even notice them, because they slipped by. Now, you don't need to be worried about what you've missed in the past. The question just becomes, what do you want to be focused on? What do you want to become prepared for? What do you want to actively prepare for right now so that your future self will thank you later? That's step number one. Step number two, what do you need to become strategically ignorant of right now? What do you need to block out so that you can actually focus? In order to create wealth, you need to create concentration. Concentration is how you create wealth. Diversification is ultimately how you protect wealth. That's what I've heard, at least. So all of this brings us to the third idea, which is selective attention. Selective attention is the idea in psychology that we all do have a worldview, and that worldview is shaped by what we give our attention to. Dr. Stephen R. Covey said we see the world not as it is, but as we are, or as we've been conditioned to see it. We all have a mental filter. Dan Sullivan said your eyes can only see and your ears can only hear what your brain is looking for. Now, if you want to be a conscious, intentional human being, then what you need to do is you need to decide what you want to direct your brain towards. Your brain is always looking for something, and whatever your brain is looking for, that's what your eyes and ears see. We see selectively. We don't see the whole world as it is, but we see the world as we are, or as we've been conditioned to see it, and as we've trained our brain to see it. And so what do you do now? How do you take all of this? It's three simple strategies. Number one, realize that right now, you're currently blind to a lot of things that your future self is going to be aware of. The sooner you think about what your future self wants and what they're up to, then the sooner you can start becoming less blind and you can start becoming strategic and begin actively preparing for that. You can rid yourself of the blindness that's currently potentially stopping you from taking massive action. Another great thing to do, though, is to continuously reflect on the progression you've made from your former self. This is what Dan Sullivan of Strategic Coach would call being in the game. Taking time to look back on what your former self was thinking about, what they were doing, what they were pursuing, versus your current self. Your current self now knows things that you used to be blind to. Actually, Daniel Kahneman, the author of Thinking Fast and Slow, he was recently interviewed by Adam Grant. And Adam Grant basically asked him, Daniel Kahneman, do you see the world the same way you did when you wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, like 10 years ago? And Daniel Kahneman was like, no, I totally see so many things that I didn't see back then. And Adam Grant was like, well, how do you feel about that? And Daniel Kahneman was like, I'm so excited about that. But then Adam Grant said, well, how does that make you feel about the book? Because the book, is limited based on what you knew in the past. And I loved what Kahneman said. He basically just said, that's all right. That was a reflection of where I was at back then. So there's no point in being mad at your former self. It's actually very powerful to recognize and appreciate the growth of what your former self saw, what they were ignorant of, what they were pursuing. Just as an example, 7, 8 years ago when I was in my undergrad, I wasn't necessarily thinking about finances. I wasn't thinking about setting up my life and developing passive streams of income because I was so focused on my schoolwork. So I was blind to opportunities for building wealth because I was so focused on getting A's on my classes. And so I'm not mad at my former self, but I can also see the progression. I can see that right now, the things that I see, the things I'm aware of, the things that I'm pursuing, the goals that I have, the way I define success are all very different from my former self. But the same is also true of my future self. And if I want to live my life intentionally, I need to be first off aware that my current self is very limited. My current self is blind to many things that would potentially be advantageous to my future self. And the sooner I think about what I want my future self to be, the sooner I can start removing the blindness. In psychology, your motivation is either approach or avoid. Rather than trying to avoid what you don't want, which is a willpower way of trying to make change, what you want to do is you want to clarify what you want, and then you want to spend your time and energy approaching that. The more you do something, the more you'll want it. The more you'll do something, the more you start to see more and more of it. There's a great quote from Robert Kiyosaki. He said, intelligence is the ability to make finer distinctions. Finer distinctions means your worldview gets clearer and more specific. Rather than trying to avoid what you don't want, you clarify what you do want, and you just feed that. You feed that beast, and you start to develop clear and clearer perspective of it. You become more of an expert on it. You start to see distinctions. Where someone sees one frame, you see 50. You get a more clear expertise and perspective, and you can then move that forward. So approach what you want rather than trying to avoid what you don't. Clarify what you want, and then really educate yourself on that thing, and you'll start to become less blind, and you can actively prepare right now for your future self. Psychologists have found that there are two types of passion. One is really healthy, and the other is completely destructive. So the healthy one is called harmonious passion. It's where you want something and you've got intrinsic motivation towards it. It doesn't get in the way of everything else in your life. Whereas the other one, the super unhealthy one, is called obsessive passion. The difference between the two is basically the difference between wanting and needing something. If you feel like you need something, then it becomes an obsession. It becomes something that you become overly defined by. Think about anything in your life. If you feel like you need it to be happy, or if you feel like you need it to be someone, then you're never going to actually find happiness. That puts you on what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, where you're constantly seeking the next thing and constantly being let down. So the question that you have to have is, when you're looking at your life and your goals and your objectives, do you need this thing or do you want it? You can be 100% committed to something that you want. You don't have, just because you can get to a place of 100% commitment and it still can be purely out of intrinsic motivation and purely out of want. And let me give an example. I'm a completely 100% committed to my wife and to my kids, but it's because I want to be with them. It's not some unhealthy need. If it ever became a place where I needed them to be happy, then I would be putting so much external pressure on them to be something for me that I need to be for myself. A relationship is truly healthy if you're 100% committed to it, but it's purely in a harmonious form, a harmonious passion. It doesn't get to this unhealthy level of becoming an obsession. But instead, you want to be purely intrinsically motivated, not extrinsically motivated. There's a lot of research on the theory of what's called self-determination theory. Self-determination theory means you have autonomy. It means you have freedom of choice. And that is very important to motivation. It's also important to choosing your life. It's important having freedom. Actually, in philosophy, they've broken freedom up into two categories. One is that you have freedom from. Freedom from means you're free from certain constraints. You're free from obstacles. You could be free from addiction. The other one is freedom to. Freedom to choose specifically what you want. We live in a world where we have a lot of freedoms from. We have a lot of choices. We can choose what we want. But the question is, do you have the courage to have the freedom to choose what you want? This is a very powerful conversation, and it's something that hit me really hard. I was talking to a friend last night, and I was telling him about my goals, and he helped me realize that with one of them, it was an unhealthy need. It was something that I felt like I needed because I built so much of my identity around it. And it's not that the goal is bad. Actually, the goal is great. It's that I had put it in the category of need, and therefore it became an obsessive passion. And therefore, it was not creating freedom in my life, but it was stopping me from being free. You can have the same goal, but it can be purely out of want. And it can be purely intrinsically motivated, and it can be a choice you've made. And so think about your life right now. Think about, what are you pursuing? Is it because you feel like you need it, or is it because you genuinely want it? And that's going to take some hard honesty on your part. Here's how you'll know if it's in the world of need. And here's how you'll know if it's an obsessive passion rather than something harmonious. If it's an obsessive passion, and if you feel like it's a need, it's going to lead you to a lot of unhealthy behaviors. Like attracts like. How you do anything is how you do everything. If you're in the realm of doing something out of need and it's unhealthy and it's obsessive, then you're going to do a lot of short-term thinking to get there. You're not playing the long game. Anything that's ultimately going to create high success and high happiness is always long-term thinking. Harmonious passion is long-term thinking. Wanting is long-term thinking. It's wanting what you want, and it's having a long-term perspective. But if you have an obsessive passion and you feel this need, then you're going to do things that are ultimately destructive to the long term in order to get what you want in the short term. For example, if you're killing your health to get what you think you want, then it's probably an unhealthy obsessive passion. Anything that's contrary to the long-term benefits is going to be in the realm of unhealthy obsessive passion. And that's where you're going to feel like you need it. If you feel like you need something, you're going to ultimately really wreck your long-term future in order to get it. So this is where you want to look at your diet. If you're overly using stimulants. As an example, for a long time I overly used stimulants, specifically just caffeine. But once I was able to shift out of the needing to the wanting and just choosing for myself, being autonomous, having freedom towards what I wanted, having more of a harmonious passion, having more intrinsic motivation, choosing what I wanted and being free from everything else. When you step into that realm of choosing to be free and choosing what you want and playing the long game, a few good things happen. First off, you can free yourself from the things you don't want. You can be more courageous. You can free yourself from the relationships, the situations, the addictions, the habits that you were using to fulfill some need. You can remove all those. You can be free from those so that you can be free to go towards what you really want. And it takes courage. It takes courage. There's going to be a lot of resistance in your life. One of the books that I really love is The War of Art. He talks about facing that resistance. Now, you face that resistance in a few different ways. You face that resistance, let's call it first thing in the morning when you try to get to your work. If you're a writer, it's getting down and getting to business, getting to writing, putting the important before the urgent. But it's also facing the resistance of things that you're procrastinating doing. If you're avoiding doing something, or if you're facing that, if you're avoiding the resistance, if you're avoiding doing something, then you're clinging onto it for some unhealthy need. And so you want to remove those things. I love this quote from Naval Ravikant. Naval Ravikant's this amazing investor, but he says that anything truly good in life and that is successful comes from compound interest. And compound interest requires a long-term effect. So compound interest in relationships, in health, in learning, in business, in anything. Compound interest is the thing that makes it successful, and compound interest takes time. So reading 2 books isn't going to really help you, but if you read a book a week or 10 books or 20 books a year for the next 30 years, there's going to be compound interest. It's just like investing. And so one of the things you want to do is you want to ask yourself, what's the thing that I want to be doing for the rest of my life? Or what do I value and believe in that I could do for the rest of my life? And that allows you to purge out some of those unhealthy needs and some of those unhealthy relationships. And it takes courage. It takes courage to be free from the things that you've been holding on to lately out of fear. And that, if you're holding on to it out of fear, then you're holding on to it in the needy category. You're trying to, you feel like you need it, and you don't. You don't need it. That's the powerful thing. You don't need it. Let me give a few examples. Just recently was able to get rid of a few business relationships that no longer made sense to me, and I had a lot of decision fatigue about those. Decision fatigue means it's still on your mind, it's on the back burner, you've got some internal conflict about it. You want to remove decision fatigue by making a powerful decision, and the decision you want to make is ultimately one based on what you want towards your long-term future. Remove the behaviors, the people, the situations that don't resonate towards your long-term future self. The longer term you can think about relationships, activities, behaviors, the better decisions you'll make in the present. That's why you want to focus on the important over the urgent. If you're so focused on the urgent, you're focused on what you need. It's out of fear, it's out of desperation rather than out of self-determination. Self-determination is far more powerful. And so these 2 types of passion are very interesting. You've got harmonious and healthy passion, which is based on want, intrinsic motivation, and you've got unhealthy passion, obsessive passion based on need. And it's based on believing that some external thing is going to get you what you want, and it's not. Another thing that Naval Ravikant talks about is that happiness is purely an internal game. There actually is no such thing as external progress. It's all internal. There's no external validation. It's all internal. It's a one-player game. And so you can't actually get validation from someone else. At the end of the day, what other people think of you is none of your business. You have to ultimately do that for yourself. And what ends up happening is that the outside world just becomes a manifestation of what's going on inside. So the more healthy, clear, happy, committed, and true you become to what you want on the inside, the more you'll be able to create harmony on the outside. That's really what the purpose of harmonious passion is all about, is that you've got harmony on the inside and on the outside. Whereas obsessive passion, there's not harmony between what's going on inside of you and what's going on outside of you. You're creating all sorts of conflicts because you're internally conflicted. There's that great quote that says a double-minded person is unstable in all their ways. And so if you have decision fatigue about anything, and decision fatigue means you're still conflicted about it, you're still making the decision, that's because there's some form of resistance. And if you're still holding on to it, it's because there's some unhealthy need that you're trying to make out of fear. Here's the cool part about facing fear and exercising your courage. So in behavioral economics, there's been a lot of research on what's called loss aversion or avoidance aversion. And basically what happens is that when we're thinking about doing something that we really want to do, that's going to take courage. Courage means that there's no guaranteed outcome. Like you don't know if it's going to work. That's why it requires courage. When you're going to face a fear or make a decision, often because we're afraid of loss, we inflate the potential downsides by an enormous amount. And that stops us from taking action because we've inflated all the worst case potential scenarios. And the truth is that whenever you take action, almost always, like 99% of the time, the actual downsides are far less than you expected them to be. They're always far less, and you can always figure it out on the other side. And the freedom from all of that decision fatigue, all that noise, all that fear, all that need goes away. And you then are free to go towards what you want, freedom too. And so if you're thinking about eliminating something from your life, even an addiction. One of the things that they say in the addiction world is that one of the reasons people stay in addictions is because that's what's become predictable for them. And if you remove the addiction, you've now inflated the possible downsides. Like, you don't know if you can actually keep your life going because the only thing that's become normal for you is the addiction. And so you think that, as an example, and this was a real thing, when I was doing a ton of writing, I got used to doing it on caffeine, and I developed the belief system that I couldn't actually write at a high level without it. That was a false belief. That was a pure addiction belief. And that's when you know it's an addiction, is when you actually think you need the dang thing. And so a reason why people would stay in an addiction is because they now believe that they actually need it. And again, need and want are two different things. If you can do something because you want it, but not because you think you need it, then you could be in a healthy place. But if you think you need it, then when you remove it, before you remove it, you're going to inflate the downsides. You're going to inflate the downsides, but it's just not true. So if you remove the addiction, you're going to realize you have so much more freedom because you're now free from it, and you can now be free to what you want. The only reason you would keep that thing in your life in the first place is because you felt like you needed it. And that creates obsessive passion, that creates short-term thinking, that creates extreme conflicts in your life, and it stops you from making progress. It creates repetition without progress, is what Steven Pressfield said. He basically said that's what addiction is repetition without progress, and it creates incapacity as a result. And so that's where you would know if you're in an obsessive passion, is if you're doing something out of need, you're doing it repetitively without progress, and you're becoming increasingly incapable as a result. Harmonious passion is the exact opposite. Self-determination is the exact opposite. You're choosing the better choices that ultimately lead you to compound interest in relationships, in money, in freedom, in knowledge, in health over the long run. And you're doing it because you want to, not because you need to. You're removing the things that you don't want. You're removing the things that you used to hold on to out of fear, desperation, or need, and you're only doing what you want. And you're only creating relationships that allow you, that you want to be in for the long run. That is a powerful place to be. And so anything in your life right now that you're holding on to out of need or fear or worry that you actually feel like you need this thing, that might be the thing to get rid of in terms of addiction, situation. I removed, for example, my literary agent. I felt like I needed her to succeed, and I didn't. I've got the freedom to choose what I want. And so it's being self-determined. It's choosing what you want for the long run and choosing what you feel right about. And it's making choices now. Hard choice now, easy life later. Easy choice now, hard life later. So you want to face that resistance. You want to exercise that courage, rip off that Band-Aid, and be free from the things that are stopping you. Your body, your mind, and your environment are all trained by you. Let's start with the body. Your body is trained by you with what you consume. Whatever you consume, your body starts to depend on. So you might be dependent on carbs or caffeine or sugar or other extreme addictions. We all train our bodies to want and to need things. The ketogenic diet, as an example, is a way to retrain your body from needing carbs to actually needing fats. And so you have trained your body, whatever it is, to need a certain amount of sleep, to need certain types of foods, and you can retrain your body. The easiest way to retrain your body is to set clear goals and clear parameters for yourself. For example, if you're going to go 30 days with no sugar or no carbs, like having clear goals, but also having clear accountability. Clear accountability means that whatever you measure improves, whatever you measure and report improves exponentially. So you want to actually measure and report what you're eating. Tim Ferriss in the book, The 4-Hour Body, actually has a really good strategy for that. He said before you eat anything, you have to take a picture of it. And you have to take a picture and send it, for example, to your accountability partner. What if you had to take a picture of everything before you ate it? That would actually give you a few seconds to question if you actually want it. That's actually a good psychological strategy. In psychology, there's a concept called implementation intentions. What it means is that you plan for failure, or you have an automatic pre-planned response whenever you're faced with a situation. So let's just say you're faced with a situation and you get some craving and you want to eat food. Well, if the automatic response is that you have to pull out your camera, take a picture of it, and send it to your accountability partner or your health coach or whatnot, that automatic response might give you enough time for the craving to go away. Usually it's 10 to 60 seconds where you're in like the high extreme trigger state. So you have clear goals and parameters, which allows you to actually have a filter. You have accountability, which means you measure what you're eating and you report it to someone. And then you have some strategy, which allows you to be mindful in the heated moments. This could be take a picture of everything you eat. By the way, you can apply that to finances as well. If you had to pull out a notebook and write down everything that you were going to buy before you bought it, you would buy less of it. When you measure something, you manage it. And when you measure something, especially before you engage in it, you can manage it intentionally rather than being reactive. So you train your body. You train your body as to what it needs. You could ask yourself, what kind of body do I want? What do I want my body to need? You could train your body rather than needing carbs and sugars to need something healthier, fruit, vegetables, better sleep. You train your body what it needs. The second thing that you train is your mind or your worldview. In psychology, we call that selective attention. You have a trained worldview. Dan Sullivan said your eyes can only see and your ears can only hear what your brain is looking for. So the question is, what is your brain looking for and what have you trained yourself to see? Dr. Stephen R. Covey said, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are or as we've been conditioned to see it. So you've trained yourself to see the world a certain way. If you're, for example, a Republican or a Democrat, you've been trained and nurtured to see the world a certain way. You can also untrain your mind. You can train yourself to see and focus on what you want to see. You do that by planting seeds. Your mind is like a garden. And so you have to proactively plant the seeds which start to grow. For example, reading good books, gratitude, journaling. You can train yourself to focus on and see what you want to see what you want to pursue. And I guess a good question would be, what is it that you're currently seeing and paying attention to right now? And what do you want to be seeing and paying attention to? The third thing that you train is your environment. Think, for example, of your news feeds. You've trained your environment to come at you a certain way. You train the world how to treat you. You train other people how to see and treat you. So everything in your environment is what you've trained. You've trained your environment to be a certain way, and now that environment is shaping you. There's a great quote from Churchill. He said, "We first build our house, then our house builds us." The same is true of your environment. If you do not create and control your environment creates and controls you. But if you create an environment, then whatever environment you've created will shape you. And so you want to be thoughtful about the environment you shape. You want to be thoughtful about the environment you train. If it comes to your news feeds, for example, look at your environment right now and see that you've trained it. You can always delete all the history off your phone and think, what are maybe the news feeds that I want to be feeding me? Or do I want none at all? So you can set better parameters, better rules, better defaults on your environment. You can reset the boundaries and expectations in your relationships. You can be more clear and honest about what you want. Maybe you can remove some people from your life. You train your physical body for what it needs. In terms of addiction, in terms of what you eat. You train your worldview and what you see, and you train your environment and ultimately what's coming at you and what's shaping you. The question is, are you going to take ownership over those three things? Are you going to better train your body to need and want better things? And by the way, one of the ways you retrain your body is to retrain the emotions that you need. Your physical body is actually a makeup of emotions. And so you may have trained your body to need the emotions of anger or jealousy or fear or shame, whereas as you kind of grow in your emotional development, you can train your physical body to prefer things and have a better emotional baseline of peace, gratitude, happiness, love, joy, acceptance. So you retrain your body in terms of the emotions that it needs and produces, but also the types of physical things such as food, stimulants, screens. So you've trained the addictions you have and you can retrain those and train your physical body to need better things. There's a great quote that says, if your body controls your mind, then it becomes corrupt. But if your mind controls your body, then it can become pure and holy. So that's a great quote. So then the second thing is, obviously, you've trained your worldview. You've trained how you see the world. And if you want to retrain it, you plant the right seeds. You decide what you want. You start writing about it. You start planting those seeds. You start focusing on what you want. Whatever you focus on expands. And you can then train your worldview to see what you want to see. Gratitude is one of the most powerful ways to do that. And then your environment. You retrain your environment by eliminating the things you don't want, by setting clear boundaries and expectations, by being more honest, and by thinking about your future self. What are the things that you want to shape your future self? Just as an example, the thing behind me. I created this culture wall. This is called a culture wall because I wanted triggers in my environment that reminded me of my future self. Rather than having environments built all around me that are like landmines that trigger my former self or trigger trauma or habits or addictions, you want to train your environment to propel and support your future self and to eliminate things that you don't want. A great concept on that is called strategic ignorance, where you create boundaries in your environment and filters to block yourself from seeing anything. As an example, I have an assistant who has become my filter. I've given her rules for what I want to see and what I don't want to see. And then she presents only the things that I want to see. So you can create filters around yourself and your environment, and you can train your environment to support you having a flow state, to support you being where you want to be, to support you being present, to support you being intentional with your family. Those are the 3 things you train, and I'm not really sure how much more fundamental it gets. You train your body, you train your mind, you train your environment. The question is, are you going to take ownership of those 3 things? There are 3 levels of goals. All 3 of these you want. If you have all 3, not only will you be really clear on who you are and where you're going, you'll have peace of mind, it'll honestly slow time down and make you feel like you've got a lot of clarity, but also it'll give you a lot of productivity. So the highest level is the why, the second level is the what, the third level is the how. Let me explain. Why goals could be in the form of your purpose. So Stephen Kotler and Peter Diamandis, they talk about having a massively transformative purpose. This could be a sense of calling, mission, purpose. I would challenge you to have no more than 3, but you could have 3 aligning purposes. What psychologists call harmonious passion means that you've got multiple goals or multiple aspects of your life, but they all harmoniously help each other. They're all pointing in the same direction. They all support each other. So you could have 3 why, big purposes. This is your North Star. So it could be to, heal the world of addiction, as my friend Joe Polish is. It could be whatever you want. It could be just to help animals, or it could be to help people learn about God. It could be just, could be to help yourself reach a certain level. Purpose goals, though, are different from passion, because purpose usually takes you out of yourself and out into the world where you have a cause and you're helping someone else usually. I would challenge you to have no more than 3, 1 to 3 major purposeful goals. And why I like the idea of massively transformative purposes is that by pursuing it, your life transforms and you transform over time as a result. The second level is the what, which is what psychologists would call high, hard goals. The research shows that really high, really challenging and hard goals are way more motivating, exciting, and interesting than low goals. And these high, hard goals are not things you can accomplish in a weekend. They're things that may take several months or several years to accomplish. These could be things like getting a college degree, a PhD. It could be writing a book. It could be qualifying for the Boston Marathon. It could be building a business and selling it. You get to determine the high, hard goal. But one of the reasons why you want high, hard goals is obviously as you get better and better at accomplishing high, hard goals, through that process of getting up there and achieving something big, you now have new levels of confidence. You've created a new trajectory. You've created a new situation. But also, having further out goals is really powerful. Having goals that are further out allows you to run your own race. It allows you to have more power versus force. If you're constantly trying to force really short-term outcomes rather than having a nice, long trajectory, then you're going to probably avoid the deep learning of the process. One of the things that Kobe Bryant said when he was young is, his first year playing basketball, he was horrible, but then he really committed to the long-term goal of becoming really good, and that allowed him to fall in love with the process. It allowed him also to get more creative and courageous because he was playing a longer game. Like, it was okay if he missed this game or failed or missed that shot or failed this game or even failed this season because he was playing a really long game. And so you want far out goals. You want high, hard goals, challenging goals. I would even challenge you to have goals that are big enough that they may take 3, 5, or 10 years to accomplish. I recently thought about where I want to be in 2030, which is in like 8.5 years from now, because I believe that that's when my wife and I are going to be moving from where we live, which is in Florida. It's just a really good timeline. That's when our youngest that we adopted, so we adopted 3 kids, and then we have 3 other kids. But the youngest one that we adopted is 9, and I believe he'll be going out when he's 18, whether that be college, serving a church mission, or something else. And so we've got until 2030. And so that allowed me to think, okay, I've got a lot of time. I can set some serious high, hard goals. And the nice part about having far out goals is it slows time down. It removes anxiety. It allows you to not feel rushed. You have this huge vision. There's a great quote that says, "Good timber does not grow with ease. The stronger wind, the stronger trees, the further sky, the greater length, the more the storm, the more the strength, by sun and cold, by rain and snow, in trees and men, good timbers grow." But the part that's really cool, obviously that whole poem is cool, that's by Douglas Malloch, but the further sky, the greater length. The further out you can project, the slower your time goes. From a time relativity standpoint, the further you go and the faster you go, the slower time passes. And so having a far out vision slows time down. It removes anxiety. It allows you to think what you really want. One of the things that Dan Sullivan, the co-founder of Strategic Coach, says is, you know, if you have like 10, 15, 20 years to do something, almost anything becomes possible. You could create 10x, 100x, whatever you're currently doing if you've got enough time. There's no unrealistic goals, there's only unrealistic timelines. So having high, hard goals that are big, really powerful, really challenging. I, for example, have a goal of eventually selling 10 million books. But that might take me a decade. It might take me until 2030 when my son's moving out. But that's okay. Because I have 8 years to do it, I can really just engage in a beautiful process. I can enjoy my life here and now. I don't have to be always wanting to be there, but I can enjoy being here because I know I'm walking on this amazing path. So the third level of goals is what are called specific goals. These are more your hows. So for example, if I want to sell 10 million books, or if I want 1 million subscribers on YouTube, and these are just my own goals, my specific goal for today may be to write 500 words or to film 2 YouTube videos. Specific goals are things you can accomplish right now. You can actually get them done like today or this week. So specific goals are like things on your daily to-do list. I would challenge you to have no more than 3 items on a daily basis that are specific goals. Those should be focused on impact, not based on busyness. You got to look at your vision of your future self, your high-level purpose, and even your high, hard goals, which are out there, and you got to ask yourself, what is the most effective, powerful thing I can do right now that would help me achieve that? Another way of getting to a specific goal is asking yourself, when you look at your high, hard goal, you know, in my case, it could be selling 10 million books. In your case, it may be getting into the Boston Marathon or starting a business. When you clarify the outcome that you want, one of the most powerful ideas I've heard is called minimum effective dose. I first learned this from Tim Ferriss in his book, The 4-Hour Body. It's actually a concept in pharmacy. So minimum effective dose means what's the minimum dosage for something to get the desired result. In the case of medicine, what's the minimum effective, dosage to get a result for the person? The opposite is called maximum effective dose. What's the maximum dosage of something then it stops being effective? So what's cool about minimum effective dose is you ask yourself the question, what is the minimum requirement to get the desired result I want? When it comes to, for example, boiling water, water boils at 212 degrees. That's the minimum dosage for boiling water. Anything above that's wasteful. So if you're up at 250 degrees, you're just wasting energy. You could have gotten the same result somewhere down here. So once you've clarified your high hard goal, your specific goal, an amazing question could be, what's the minimum effective dose to achieving that? What's the minimum requirement to getting that outcome? And then that can give you clarity for specific high value, high caliber, specific goals that you can then set to getting there. One of the reasons why I like this model of having all 3 of these is that your high hard goals allow you to fall in love with the process. They allow you to slow time down. They allow you to really enjoy the present moment because you're here and now. You're in this moment. You're appreciating this moment. As an example for me, I know I've got probably 8 years, barring any unforeseen event, living here in Orlando, Florida. That means I can just fully enjoy this. I can fully enjoy writing those books, doing what I'm doing, raising my kids, taking them to tennis lessons and things like that. And the chapter's got some length. It's also got some depth. That's how you can be like the tortoise, for example. You got the tortoise and the hare. The tortoise is the slow compounding effect of just engaging in the process, playing the long game, not overly trying to just rush it. And so you can engage in high hard goals that are really powerful, big. They allow you to play your own game. They allow you to enjoy where you're at. They allow you to just engage in the process. They create huge compounding effects if you be consistent. But why I like the specific goals, and also maybe more short-term targets, like weekly targets, monthly targets, where you've got shorter-term timelines and you're focused on high impact, is that then you can have sprints. You still want to have sprints. You don't want to just be in slow motion. You do want to have short-term intense objectives that push you way outside your comfort zone, but they're more specific. And so then you can also be the hare. You can ask yourself, what's the most bold, courageous thing I can do right now to get to my future self? Or what's a quantum leap I can make? Or what's a wormhole I can create? Or who's someone I can reach out to that if I create this connection or if I create this outcome, then I'll immediately be where I'm at. Maybe if your high hard goal is right now 10 years away, but you're able to create some sprint, you might be able to cut that time in half. So you can be the tortoise and the hare. You can have this nice, peaceful, present, compounding effect of just being consistent towards your bigger term future self, while at the same time having shorter term specific targets that are 80-20, meaning they're focused on outcome, they're focused on effectiveness, they're not just you being busy. And you can take bold, courageous, short-term actions towards your future self with the security net of your long-term goals. That's one of the things that Kobe Bryant found, is that once he got committed to the big game, the long game, it actually gave him permission to be more courageous in the short term because he wasn't forcing things anymore. He could be courageous. He could fail. He could risk things because he was playing a longer game. It wasn't do or die in that moment. It was like, yeah, if you fail, it's okay because you've got tomorrow and you've got next week, next year. Like you're committed to this in the long run. You've got really high, hard goals, and your specific goals can be far more courageous based, far more creative based, far more outcome based. So I love those 3 levels of goals. Kind of to break it down more simply, I would challenge you to have no more than 3 high-level why purposes. You define what are the 3 organizing principles for my life, or what are the 3 things that I care about more than anything else. And then from there, what are some high, hard goals that I could pursue that would help, would allow me to live out that purpose, but would also get me to a place in my life and in my trajectory that would be super exciting and would be a process that I would love going through, that maybe over the next 3, 5, 10 years, if I continue and be consistent with that, like everything could be on a totally fundamentally different level. And then from there, your short-term goals, I would challenge you to have no more than 3 on a daily basis. Have no more than even 3 on a weekly basis. What are your big 3 for the week? What are the 3 outcomes that, if accomplished, would make massive exponential progress towards your big goals? I like the idea of having the slow, peaceful, mindful consistency of the tortoise while having the short-term, you can be courageous, you can take risks, you can be bold, because you have the security blanket that you do have a long-term vision, and you're going to stay at it whether you win or lose, whether you hit or don't hit on like maybe your short-term courage bursts. You're still just moving forward, and you're playing the long game. You're committed to the long game. You're secure in yourself. You're running your own race. So those are the 3 levels of goals. Bill Gates said that most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, and they underestimate what they can do in a decade. That same principle, though, can be scaled down. Most people underestimate what they can do in 1 year, and they overestimate what they can do in a single day. Most people, they try to do so much in one day, and it leads them to constantly feeling like failures. They've got like 50 things on their to-do list. They're burning themselves out on they're overly stimulated. They're not sleeping well, and ultimately that leads to poor performance. If you're not trying to like take over the world in one day, and instead you realize, look, if I can get into a consistent pattern, a consistent system, a consistent routine, I can just make powerful progress on a daily basis, then I can stop, recover, let it go, because I'm playing the long game. If you play the long game and are consistent for a long period of time, you're going to have huge compounding effects. And so rather than trying to overestimate what you can do in a single day, get really good at finding that sweet spot. Apply the 80-20 principle. 80% of results come from 20% of what you do. Don't have 50 things on your daily to-do list. Have like 2 or 3 really important things, important and not urgent. Wake up, get to your important activities, eat the frog, as they would say, put the worst first, and knock those things out. Get yourself like 2 to 4 or 5 hours of really good flow, then just fully recover and allow yourself to enjoy your life. If you try to accomplish too much in one day, then you're probably short-term thinking. If you have a long-term vision and a long-term plan and you're playing the long game, which means you're playing your own game, you've set your own game, you're excited about that game, then you can really get deep into the process. Then you can get deep into doing what you want to do and stop trying to prove yourself to others. Stop trying to get to the next level. You can play your own game right now. So here's the basics of how to do it. Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, said that if you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. First off, you set the long-term vision. What is the game you're actually playing? And then from there, you just get into a rhythm of finding the sweet spot of how much you can do in a single day. And then once you're done, just let it go. Be done. Psychologically detached from work. There's a lot of research on this. You want to psychologically detach from work, meaning you're comfortable walking away. Even the author Ernest Hemingway would walk away mid-sentence. He didn't need to finish that sentence. He would write for a period of time, and then he would end midway through a sentence so that he left himself a space to start tomorrow. Tomorrow, he could come, and he's already halfway through the sentence, so he can make it an easy, quick win and get momentum for tomorrow. Give yourself permission to celebrate and to walk away. You've done the 2 to 4 or 5 flow-based, focused hours. You've knocked out the 2 to 3 things that really matter today. Now go, recover, enjoy your life so that you're in the joy of the process, in the joy of your long game. You're here. You're not trying to be there. You're just enjoying where you're at. You know you're playing the game. If you have a long-term game, there's no competition against you because you're not trying to force it. That doesn't mean you're not making aggressive action. It doesn't mean you're not taking bold leaps towards your future self. It doesn't mean you're not being courageous. But if you're trying too hard to take over the world today, what that means is that you don't actually have a long-term vision. You can have a long-term vision. You can be hyper-aggressive. You can be courageous. You can make power moves today. But you can also live to fight another day. You can walk away and say, I know that if I have 5 really good days this week, that's better than having 1 insane day and then 4 days of being busted and broken. If you're trying too hard to knock out too much in the short term, that may probably lead you to really unhealthy mechanisms for doing that, whether that be like drugs or who knows what you'll do to try to create some fast result. But if you're playing the long game, and if you're playing your own game, and if you're no longer competing with other people, if you're what psychologists would call self-determined, and if you're intrinsically motivated, meaning you love your path, you know that your future self is bigger than you. You're actively preparing and creating your future self, but you're also really happy with where you're at. You're enjoying the process. You're failing forward and measuring backward, as some people would say. Then you can rock today out. You can be in flow. You can make meaningful progress towards your future self. And then you can be satisfied. You can walk away and you can say, tomorrow's going to be amazing as well. And then you can get consistent at creating very powerful, very important progress on a daily basis. 2 to 3 key outcomes. It could be, if you're a writer, writing for 2 to 4 hours on that book in complete flow, no distractions, and then you walk away. Or you send a few key emails to potential collaborators. You do a few things. You measure your progress backwards, meaning you're reflecting on the progress you've made and you're enjoying and appreciating that progress. And then you set the big 3 for the next day. And then consistently over time, you're making the right moves. You're allowing yourself to recover. You're feeling joy in the process. You're running your own long-term race, which you're super excited about. You're not worried about anyone else. You're not trying to prove yourself to anyone else. You know that if you stick with this, and obviously you'll improve and you'll adapt your process along the way, but because you're playing such a long game and because you're doing it consistently rather than all crazy, you know how the compound effect works. You know that in the next few years, you're going to be skyrocketing exponentially. That's exactly what Kobe Bryant said, by the way. Kobe Bryant, in an interview with Lewis Howes, talked, and this was probably a year before he passed away, he talked about how his first year playing basketball, he was like 11 years old. He was horrible. He didn't make a single shot. But his dad told him that Kobe, whether you score 0 points or 60, I'm still going to love you. And then Kobe, what he realized from that is that he had the security to fail. He had the security to try, and that his dad would still love him. And that's when he started to take the long-term game. He started to really say, okay, I'm committed to this for the long haul. I don't need to try to prove myself to my dad. I don't need to try to get quick victories because I'm inadequate or insecure. I'm going to choose the game I want to play, and I'm going to master that game. And so once he felt secure in himself, he then set a long-term game. And when you have a long-term game, then you can really commit to a pure process. Then you can commit to actually getting really good at the fundamentals. You can get good at making the right progress rather than trying to force things. It's that whole difference between power versus force. If you've got the long game, if you're playing your own game, then you're no longer competing with anyone else. Then you're no longer trying to prove yourself to anyone else. Then you can enjoy where you're at. You can also make the furthest progress. You can be courageous. You can try to boldly attempt things, and you're fine failing yourself forward and then measuring yourself backwards against where you were before to see your own progress. So that's the challenge, is play the long game and then on a daily basis make massive, meaningful progress in a sustainable way, which then the compound effect over time takes over. If you're trying too hard to accomplish so much in a short period of time, I've got to ask you why. What is your motivation for that? Is it because you're insecure in yourself? Is it because you're trying to prove yourself? Is it because you don't really like yourself? If you're trying so hard to get to the next stage of your life, rather than really deciding what this one's all about, what's that for? If you're always trying to get to next, then you're never going to actually be anywhere. You're never going to be here, and it doesn't matter what that next milestone is, you're never going to actually be there. You're always going to be wanting the next thing, trying to prove yourself, and really what that proves is that there's a gaping hole inside of you, and a hole of knowing yourself, of deciding for yourself what success means to you, of running your own race, of enjoying your life, of focusing on what matters most. Set the long-term vision, get into a rhythm and a routine of being in flow, of putting the important before the urgent, of having 1, 2, or 3 major important things that you're trying to accomplish on a daily basis. Give yourself 2, 4, 5, even 6, 7 hours of flow, whatever you want. Research shows that the most productive countries in the world actually usually work less. They're usually working 4 to 6 hours a day, but that's focused, flow-based, important, intelligent work. It's not the busyness of just reactively responding to things or being distracted 90% of the time like most people. It's no. You sat down, you were in flow, you focused, you knocked out the things you planned to do, and then you were happy and you were comfortable and you walked away. And you went and recovered and you enjoyed your life. And then you lived to fight another day. You're going to come back and you're going to be there again. That's what Steven Pressfield would call a pro. Someone who's playing the long game. Someone who comes to work every day and they just crush it. They just do their job and they leave. They don't need to take over the world in one day. They're playing the long game and they know that they can get somewhere very far over the long term. That doesn't mean you're not making hyper-aggressive growth within the umbrella of your long-term vision. But that long-term vision removes the unnecessary anxiety. It also removes you having to prove yourself to anyone else. It also allows you to lay the better track and to love the process and to get deep into the right process, which is to do what you really need to do to become a master of your craft, mastery orientation, rather than overly obsessing on externals and proving yourself to others. So don't try to accomplish too much in one day. Know that you can accomplish way more than you think in a year if you're consistent and if you're applying the compound effect. And if you're having consistent days, weeks, months where you're in flow, focused on the right things, knocking out the right things, and then fully recovering, then you're never burning out. You're loving your life. You're never burning out. You're in flow. You're in joy. You're happy with where you're at, yet you know your future self keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Every day is an investment in your future self. You don't need to burn it all down today. Your confidence and your self-awareness will increase if you learn to need less, if you learn to turn off, specifically at the end of the day, needing less stimulation, turning off your cell phone, putting it on airplane mode and allowing yourself to just be present, allowing yourself to be in flow, allowing yourself to need less. We are in a world where we need more and more stimulation. We've trained our bodies and we've become addicted literally to having stimulation. And so think about it, at the end of your day, do you need that last scroll? Do you need to watch that last video? Or can you need less? Can you turn off the consumption? Can you slow it down? There is huge power in watching yourself slow things down, becoming deliberate, becoming present, turning off, needing less. You don't need that other video. You don't need that last like. You don't need that last hit of dopamine. Instead, shut it down. Turn off your cell phone. Be present. Be engaged with those around you. Pull out your journal at the end of your day and literally write down everything that happened. Write down in bullets. It can be so fast and easy. It takes a minute or two. Just write down the events that occurred and then write what you're grateful for. Write what you want to accomplish the next day. No more than 3 key activities. And just write whatever else comes to your mind. If you give yourself this space, your awareness will increase. Your confidence will increase because you're now acting with intention. You're now mindful of the moment. You're less reactive, less distractive, less needy. It's so powerful as you end your day needing less, turning off, slowing down, being aware, being grateful, becoming intentional about the next day, and then waking up and not needing to just jump into more stimulation, not needing to be ping-ponged around, but keeping your mind slow, pulling out your journal, writing things that you're grateful for, writing what you're going to accomplish that day, just being in the zone. It allows you to get really clear on your thoughts. It allows you to get very clear with your time. It's amazing how much time you lose by needing more and more stimulation. You get to the point where you're very comfortable losing 10, 15, 20 minutes here and there, and on a regular basis you're losing hours and hours and hours every day, and you're not getting into momentum. You're not clear on your thoughts, you're not clear on your actions, you're missing the creative flow that can happen. Whereas if you give yourself permission to need less, to turn off, to slow down, to get intentional, you start to get really clear in your mind. You start to get really clear with your thoughts. You start to become a lot more creative. You get a lot more access to your subconscious. You get a lot more thoughts on creativity. You get really clear on your goals. You can become far more intentional. You can then start easily knocking out things. When you're in a flow state, when you're operating in that higher alpha or theta state, which means your mind is slow, you're not overly stimulated. And when you're just in flow, you can completely perform at a high level. When you're at flow, you can accomplish things in minutes that would take hours, weeks, months of non-flow. And most people are so used to not being in flow because they're so reactive, so distracted, so needing more. They sit down to work and they try to concentrate and focus for a few minutes, and then a notification comes off, or they need to distract themselves. They're not in flow, and so their mind is scattered. How you do anything is how you do everything, and if you can learn to slow yourself down and need less and consume less at the end of your day, and then wake up and have the discipline of keeping your mind slow, of tapping into intention, of actually having a plan, of following through with that plan before you dip into the consumption. If you have that plan, let's just say the 3 things you want to accomplish in the morning, those 3 important things. If you allow yourself in the morning to stay slow and keep your phone on airplane mode and not engage in the distraction until you've accomplished, first off, your interconnection, first off, your gratitude, your intention, whatever creative breakthroughs occur, and then if you actually accomplish something meaningful, something important before that, then you increase your confidence exponentially, because then you're actually watching yourself do what you want to do, and you're living intentionally, you're living purposefully, your brain is actually operating at a really high level. Your thoughts are clear, they're more organized, it's easy to take action, you're less reactive, distracted. Then, after you've actually accomplished something meaningful, after you've connected with yourself, after you've connected with your higher power, after you've gotten clear on your day, after you've actually moved your life forward towards your future self, all of those things build insane confidence. Confidence is the byproduct of prior performance. Confidence comes from watching yourself do what you want to do. So if at the end of your day, you actually give yourself a big 3 things you want to accomplish the next day or the next morning, you wake up and you actually follow through. Then you trust yourself that you can do it again, but at a higher level. Confidence becomes the basis of your imagination. Albert Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. And so as you build your confidence, your imagination for what you can do increases, but also your belief that you actually can do it. One of the reasons why people don't go on to succeed is because they don't believe they can succeed. Now there's 2 reasons they don't believe they can succeed. Number 1 is they don't have confidence because they don't trust themselves. But number 2, they don't know how to find the right information that would help them succeed. You won't pursue something or take it seriously unless you believe it's possible, unless you believe it's likely, unless you see its relevance. Just think about, for example, investing. Think about, it could be Bitcoin, it could be other things. There's a reason why a lot of people don't invest in their long-term future when it comes financially, and that's because they don't either believe they can, or they're unclear of how to do it. They don't know how to succeed. And so they don't actually step forward because they don't believe they can, and they don't know how to succeed. Well, as you take action towards your future self, as you progressively use your time better, especially in the mornings, and then after you've accomplished something great, you've built your confidence, not only will your confidence increase, but your knowledge of what you can accomplish will increase. Then, go ahead, open up your phone, become the ping pong ball for the day, but from there you actually operate with a lot more intention. Again, how you do anything is how you do everything. If you've learned to slow it down, if you've given yourself the permission and the discipline to need less stimulation, to need less of those 1 more, 2, 3, 4 more things, and you can just slow down, let it go, be grateful, be present where you're at, enjoy today, enjoy tomorrow, take action on your future self, be in love with the process yet committed to your future self. Then when you actually do start using your cell phone or your email, you start using it a lot more intentionally. Maybe you make better rules around it. You feel like you don't have the need to respond immediately to various things. Again, it's removing need. You don't need to respond to that email. You don't need to check your Facebook. You don't need to do whatever it is you think you do. You then begin operating based on want. And you have less attachment, less distraction, and less addiction. And you can then slow things down entirely. And by slowing things down, you actually speed things up. By slowing things down, you can actually get clear on where you want to go, and then you can take mindful but also flow-based action towards your future self in the direction you actually want to go. There's the analogy that airplanes spend about 95% or more of time off course because they're constantly being hit by turbulence and by like wind pressure and all these things. They're always kind of being knocked off course, but there's this inertial guidance system that's constantly course correcting. So despite the fact that airplanes are off course 95% of the time, they arrive at their intended destination usually on time, on average on time. And that's because they're constantly course correcting. Well, this is why you want to have your slow down morning, evening routines, slowing it down. By just writing things down, writing what you've done. But also I would invite you to give yourself a few minutes just to try to get aware of what's going on in your head or what's going on in your emotions. Mindfulness is the awareness of what's going on. It's the awareness of what's going on non-judgmentally. Rather than being caught up emotionally, you're just aware of what's going on. And we all have so much stress and pressure in our lives. There's a lot going on. The world's coming at you fast. You've got bills to pay. You've got projects you're working on. You may have kids. You have situations. You have more stress and pressure on you than you're aware of. And if you just simply numb that through consumption, you're just burying it and you're creating a pressure cooker inside of you, and you're becoming less and less clear and connected to yourself. Whereas if you slow it down and get in your journal and just write about what's going on, what's going to happen is you're going to release it. There's a lot of research that shows that writing in your journal, first off, it just simply clears your mind. It also allows you to regulate your emotions. It allows you to get clear on what's going on, and it allows you to release it. Just yesterday, as an example, last night, I really, like so many others, wanted to just watch one more video, but I decided, throw the phone on airplane mode, pull out the journal, write what happened, write what I'm going to knock out tomorrow, and then I just started writing about what I was dealing with, and I am dealing with various situations right now, stresses in my work. And just by writing it down, I was able to think about it differently. When you write something down, it's different from just disorganized thought. If you just keep it in your head, it's disorganized thought. But if you write it down, you turn it into a narrative. And a narrative has an arc, a beginning, middle, and end. And then you can understand it, you can contain it, you can control it. And then you can let it go. You can understand it, name it, let it go, or clear it, and whatever that means. And so you can regulate your emotions, and that's why a lot of research shows that just simply by writing down what's going on in your life, writing down your emotions, writing down potentially your stresses, writing down your goals, all of these things increase your physical health over time. Literally, research has shown that. Writing down about your emotions, your challenges, and even your goals over time increases your physical health. It allows you to slow things down. It allows you to be more aware of yourself. And then from there, you can just move forward, less cluttered, more clear. And that's kind of your inertial guidance system. If you're not doing that regularly, you're off way more than you think. Even if an airplane is off by 1 degree for a really long period of time, over, let's just call it hundreds of miles, the gap becomes huge over time. That's the compound effect. So if you're not constantly correcting, if you're not giving yourself time to connect with yourself, clear your emotions, get clear on what you need to do, clarify your path, then you are more mixed up than you think you are, and your emotions are likely out of whack, and you're more distracted than you think you are. And in order to resolve this internal turmoil, you're just numbing yourself through some form of stimulation, probably through your phone and through food and through other forms of unhealthy distractions, which pull you away from becoming confident, which pull you away from creating your future self, which pull you away from becoming aware of what your future self would want you to be aware of. Think about what your future self is up to. Your future self is not you. Your future self is doing things and striving for things and has created outcomes that you're not even currently aware of or even thinking about. It's that whole idea that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is now. Well, for your future self, the 20 years ago might be right now, But if you're so distracted, reactive, and numbing yourself, then you may not be planting the seeds that will eventually become your future self, their situation in their life. But if you can clear that, then you can decide, well, what is the orchard I want to plant? What's the destination I want to get to? How can I remove the clutter from my life? Remove the things that are no longer necessary. Remove the things that may have reflected my past life, my former self, but no longer resonate with my future self. So I just invite you to give yourself permission, but also have the discipline to turn off, to slow down, to need less, to become more clear, to give yourself a simple system of just connecting with yourself, clearing your emotions, clearing what's going on with you, getting clear on what you want, living with intention, building confidence every day, approaching your future self, not avoiding life. As you approach your future self and become an active learner, and as you take active action steps towards your future self, you're going to become more confident, but you're also going to learn whatever is required so that you can know you can be successful at whatever it is you want. That's part of having a growth mindset, is knowing that you can succeed at whatever it is you want, whether that's health, whether that's business, whether that's investing, whether that's relationships. Rather than just avoiding those things and then numbing yourself, you actively learn those things and develop the skills, the capabilities, the confidence, and you watch yourself follow through enough that you can begin imagining a bigger future self with whatever it is you want. And then you can engage in what psychologists call deliberate practice, which is intentional, focused, meaningful learning in an approach-oriented way where you approach and actively learn the things that you want. You get feedback, you test, you try, you get better, and over time you become a new version of yourself. A few years ago, a writer named Michael Simmons wrote an article that got read tens of millions of times. And it was a very brilliant article. It was based on a single concept. And the article is called Why Constant Learners All Embrace the 5-Hour Rule. Now, the 5-Hour Rule was something he learned from Benjamin Franklin. And in this video, I'm going to break down Benjamin Franklin's daily habits, which Michael Simmons wrote about. Michael Simmons was the author. But the 5-Hour Rule is basically the idea that over a week, you give yourself at least 5 hours of deliberate learning. So that's 1 hour a day on average of deliberate, focused learning. And if you give yourself at least 1 hour of deliberate, focused learning and thinking without any distractions, no notifications, just focused, flow-based learning, you will become successful. You will become a new person. You can read tons of books. You can read at least a book a week if you gave yourself this much time to do it. There's lots of ways that you can do it. There's no right or wrong way. You can listen to audiobooks, podcasts. The point is to give yourself 1 hour of focused, deliberate learning on a specific subject that's meaningful or important to you. Now here is actually a breakdown of, and this is on the article of Michael Simmons and it's linked down below. This is what Benjamin Franklin's day consisted of. He'd wake up early and go to bed early, and he woke up and he would read for an hour and he would write. He also had personal growth goals. He created basically a club for like-minded people, basically a mastermind. He turned his ideas into experiments, and then he had morning and evening reflection questions. So at the end of every day, he would reflect on how his day went, on what he learned. At the beginning of his day, he would reflect on what he wanted to accomplish. He had a morning and evening reflection. In the morning, he would do reading and writing, and then he had goals, he had community, and he turned his ideas into experiments, businesses, ideas, innovations. So the main idea here that I want you to think about is that 5-hour rule. How much time do you actually spend per week deliberately learning in a non-distracted manner? How many books have you read in the last 3 months or last year? And I'm talking deliberate, focused. There's a difference between just random learning and deliberate learning. In psychology, there's a concept called deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is different from random practice. I could, for example, go and play tennis with my son or go play basketball with him, and we could play for days, hours. I could even go bowling 100 times and get no better at bowling because I'm not deliberately practicing. Deliberate practice means you have clear goals, you have immediate feedback, you're getting coaching, you're actually working on your strengths, your weaknesses, your knowledge base towards specific goals, towards specific outcomes, towards specific capabilities. So deliberate learning versus just random learning is, you could go and learn a lot of things on the internet. You could read a bunch of stuff, you could watch a bunch of stuff, and you could fill your mind with information. But information is very different from knowledge, and knowledge is different from wisdom. Knowledge means you're actually studying and know something useful. You've connected some dots. Wisdom means you're actually applying that knowledge. And so deliberate learning means you're actually gaining the knowledge, the skills, and the capabilities that are specific towards what you're trying to accomplish. In psychology, there's both approach and there's avoid. Both of those are different types of motivation. A lot of people's learning or information consumption is in an avoid-oriented manner. They're avoiding actually the thing that they should be doing. They're just gaining a lot of information, they're consuming a lot of stuff, but they're actually avoiding the thing that they want to be doing, or they're avoiding the skills that they should be developing or gaining knowledge that they could be developing. So in order to engage in deliberate learning or in deliberate practice, you've got to have clear goals. You've got to know where you want to go, and then you've got to start deliberately and intentionally and approach-oriented. You've got to study the specific things you want to study. I would actually argue that most of the information that people consume, probably at least 80 to 90% is avoidance-based. And that's actually generous, because research shows that most people spend 5+ hours either watching TV or on their cell phone, probably mindlessly consuming information. All of that would probably be, for the most part, avoidance-based information consuming. We've just learned to be consumers, whereas the purpose of deliberate learning is ultimately for creation. You're learning so that you can apply it. You're learning it so that you can get new skills, so that you can become less ignorant, and so that you can actually apply that learning to develop certain skills. So for example, if you want to become a millionaire, if you want to learn how to invest in real estate, deliberate learning would be like learning from that, reading it, studying books, reading courses, like actually deliberately studying the thing that you ultimately want to accomplish so that you can take that knowledge and apply it. If you're gaining a bunch of information that you really can't apply or that you can't use, that's avoidance-based. That's just distracting yourself. Whereas deliberate learning is you're deliberately learning something that you can actually use. And according to this article and the studies within it, people like Thomas Edison, Bill Gates, Benjamin Franklin, a lot of other successful people, they engage in this at least 5-hour rule, where at least 1 hour a day is devoted to deliberate learning. The reading of books, the gaining of knowledge that is useful, and the gaining of wisdom that they can actually use, apply, and begin integrating right now into their life. I would submit that if you're not spending an hour a day deliberately learning, you're actually going backwards in life. You're not actually thinking differently and gaining new knowledge and new mindsets and new models. The former version of you should see the world very differently than the former version of you. So there's a great quote from Alain de Botton, the British philosopher, and he said, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you didn't learn enough. So if you still see the world the same way you did even 12 months ago, then you probably haven't been engaged in a lot of deliberate learning. Because if you have, the compound effect of that is crazy. If you're deliberately learning, studying, reading, and gaining knowledge, then you will see the world differently. You will know things differently than your former self knew. Joshua Waitzkin is actually, he was a chess prodigy and he's a learning expert. And one of the questions he always asks himself is, what do I now not believe that 3 months ago I used to believe? So every 3 months he looks back at his former self and says, what did I used to believe that I no longer believe? Or what did I used to think that I no longer agree with? And so it's a great way to actually see that you've evolved out of your old perspectives. The same is true of your future self though. Your future self knows things that you don't know. You're very ignorant of things that your future self is aware of. And so the key is to get really clear on who you want your future self to be and then to engage in deliberate learning towards that. If you spend 80% of your time learning and 20% of your time actually working. So there's a difference. A lot of people work in their job, but they don't work on themselves. Jim Rohn said, if you work in your job, or if you work on your job, you can make a living, but if you work on yourself, you can make a fortune. Because if you work on yourself, then you're transforming, you're learning, you're developing new capability, you're seeing the world differently, and you can become a different person. You can create different outcomes. But if you're just always just working on your job, then you're not actually developing skills, vision, capability. You're just kind of on the hamster wheel, and you're staying the same person, essentially, with the same views, the same capabilities. But if you're constantly working on yourself, if you're reading at least an hour a day, or studying an hour a day, that could be a course, it could be videos, but if you're studying deliberately for at least an hour a day, then you're going to become very mindful, very thoughtful about who you are and about what you're doing. You're also going to be able to see the world differently. You're going to become aware of what you're currently blind to. If your future self has millions of dollars, but you don't, then your future self learned how to make money. They learned how to invest. They learned how to think. They learned how to collaborate. They learned how to network. They learned how to build value. And so all of those things are things you could learn. And the compound effect can take you very far. The compound effect is the idea that over time, if you repeat something over time, eventually the results start to really grow. And so if you make it a consistent practice of learning actively and deliberately and in an approach way towards specific goals and seeking specific knowledge and then applying it and integrating it, over time, success becomes inevitable. That's probably one of the most key aspects of almost all highly knowledgeable, highly successful, innovative people is that they have a love for learning and they prioritize learning. And they make it a habit to learn actively every single day. That becomes just a part of what they do. They would rather create than consume, and when they consume, it's for the purpose of creation. It's deliberate learning, it's not distracted learning. And so the question for you is, how much time do you spend deliberately learning? How much time do you spend deliberately reading, learning, studying things that you're striving to apply right now, and it would allow you to do things that you currently can't do? Deliberate learning is the key. The 5-hour rule is a very impressive principle. This article has been read 10 million times for a reason, and readers are leaders. And so please start reading more. Give yourself that space, that time to read and learn things. If you gave yourself an hour a day to just, it could be again in any form you want, reading a book, listening to an audiobook, listening to podcasts, but it's deliberate, focused learning. Maybe you're out walking, or maybe you have a journal in front of you. If you give yourself that time, here's a few things that will happen. Number one, you will start to think differently. You will begin to see the world differently. You'll begin to connect dots that your former self did not know. You'll begin to see the world differently and be able to imagine different outcomes. You'll be less ignorant of what you currently are. You'll also get insights and confidence about what you could do. If you're actually giving yourself the time to read, you're going to get amazing ideas that could lead to ideas, action, business, whatever it is. If you're giving yourself that time to learn and think, your brain's going to start operating at a higher level, and you're going to get amazing ideas. And you're going to be able to act on those ideas and be able to live differently. You're going to be able to think and live differently. And if you're not giving yourself that time, but you're instead constantly consuming, avoidance-based material, whether that's just random media online, if you're just consuming essentially non-useful material, then you're wasting your time. You're not growing, you're not creating, you're not becoming, you're just consuming, and you're in a state of paralysis. You're in a state of one day. I'll do that one day, I'll do that tomorrow. And if you wait for a lot of tomorrows, you'll have a lot of empty yesterdays, as Meredith Wilson said. And so if you're an active learner, if you're giving yourself an hour a day, if you're reading a book or 2 or 3 a week, and over time the compound effect of that is that you're going to think very differently, you're going to have different capability, different skills, different knowledge, you're going to be able to create different outcomes. You're going to be able to be successful. Frankly, you could be very successful if you make reading one of your top priorities, if you apply the 5-hour rule or more. If you make reading, learning, and studying for 1 hour a day in a completely focused manner, without distractions, where you can just listen, dig in, learn, think, write down notes, write down questions, and then begin trying to apply it, and maybe even teaching it to others. Teaching others is one of the fastest ways you can learn, and so sharing what you're learning with someone else. Learning publicly and learning privately are two different things. I love the quote from Stephen Covey where he said, "Private victory precedes public victory." Yes, you can learn in public settings, such as in a mastermind group, at a conference, at school. That's public, but private victory precedes public victory. If you're taking the time to have morning and evening routines, doing these things that, like Edison did, having time for reflection morning and evening, setting goals, being around like-minded people, but really, I think that the thrust behind what was going on with Benjamin Franklin was his reading and his writing. And he was writing about his ideas that he was reading about. He was reading about lots of things. He was reading high caliber stuff. He was reading stuff above his level. You can know that you're reading stuff above your level because it's a challenge. It's hard. It's like lifting weights. It shouldn't be easy necessarily. It should actually challenge your thinking. It might require you to look words up. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a high level of vocabulary, but it's challenging your current model, and it's freeing you to think differently than your former self could think. I'm Dr. Benjamin Hardy. You can get another video here about becoming your best future self. Please like this video, please subscribe, and apply the 5-hour rule to your life so that over time the compound effect will take you places you could not imagine you could go. You couldn't imagine where life could take you because you're going to learn things that right now you're completely unaware of, and once you learn those things, then all of a sudden completely new possibilities and potentials and goals become available to you. Have an amazing day. Talk to you later.